Welcome to the podcast, everybody. This is Speaking Of. I'm your hostess with the mostest, Eric Petty. Today, my guest is Heather Jeffries. How you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. We're filming at the North Campus here at the University of St. Francis. Not a bad place to film.
No, very nice.
It's quiet. We got some good guys. We got John, producer on the side here. Evan Boog back in the control panel, helping us out with the lighting. That's why we got some really cool stuff going on. Different kind of lighting approach today. I think it's really awesome. It's a sweet look tonight for us. As we start off with every podcast, we do the first part is called 3 questions. So here we go. Yay! Who is your favorite fictional detective? And I'll tell you if you're right or wrong, okay?
I didn't know that there was a right or wrong.
There is. Believe it or not, there is one.
I've always looked up to Nancy Drew. She's not necessarily a detective, but she's a mystery solver. So she has been my idol.
Wow. Then I probably should say on my composite side should be Encyclopedia Brown. But the correct answer is Ace Ventura.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's a pet detective.
Yes.
Yeah, but still.
I love pets.
I know. You can't go wrong with that, right? Hypothetical question. As we do it in my family, is this a hypothetical question? Yes. Okay, then the answer is yes. Whatever. If you could commit any crime today and get away with it, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. Only one? I have to
If you could
limit it.
commit a string of felonies.
I'm a very law-abiding citizen.
That's not the question. I didn't say,
I don't believe
Heather, are you a
that-
law-abiding individual? If you could commit any crime.
Yeah, I really don't think
Boo!
that I could.
I would think I would do bank robbery.
Really?
I think so.
Okay. That's taking from others without working for it.
Yeah.
Mine's that morality
Yeah,
thing.
it is. But then again, pretty
Work
much
hard for the money.
that's all crimes are pretty much that way. So,
Yes, they
yeah,
are.
unfortunately, that or maybe like that Gone in 60 Seconds movie where you're stealing like high-priced cars.
Okay.
I think that'd be all right.
Not interested.
I have a Honda Accord
Okay.
that's like a 2010.
Okay.
So
Can
maybe
you
it's like
drive a stick? A lot of those
Well, yeah, I
high-end
could-
vehicles are.
53. I've been around the world. I can drive a stick. Do you currently have, I can't tell right now, an Irish accent? Like Madonna, because Madonna went to England, came
Yes.
back, and suddenly she's all like Cockney and everything. You went to Ireland, right?
I went to Ireland, yes.
You coming back all
study abroad. Love the Irish brogue. Sometimes it was very difficult to understand.
Can you give me a little example of that?
I'll take another pint. Sorry, that's about the extent of it.
That's all
That's
you
what I
got.
heard a lot of people saying. I'll take another pint.
Yeah. My wife.
Guinness.
Is it always Guinness? I would assume.
Usually, I tried Guinness.
No,
Not,
it's
not
like
my
cough
thing.
syrup.
Yeah.
And probably not as delicious as cough syrup, quite honestly. My wife and her mom went to Ireland. I don't remember where. They saw the cliffs of Dover, whatever that is.
That's in England.
Whatever.
I've seen the cliffs of Dover, actually.
Whatever that cliff is, it's over in Ireland. How about that?
Okay.
More cliffs of
Probably. There's lots of moors.
It was you're right. There's a lot of those. And she came back, and I was like, all right, now, who's been talking about me, Pappy? And she said, you know what? They don't want you doing an Irish accent over there. Oh, how would they know that I'm not just some other villager down the road? That's number one. And I said, all right, who's been talking about me, potatoes? She goes, and don't talk about potatoes. I'm like, why? She goes, well, that
Famine.
the famine. I go, wasn't that like 600 years ago? Like, yeah, but
It's still very close to
it's
them.
very close. I didn't know that. I mean, I don't even 600 years ago here in the United States. Well, we weren't here, so I got
But a
nothing
lot
for
of
you.
Irish immigrated at that time because of the famine.
Right.
And so that's why we have a huge population of Irish.
Well, I'm
in
glad
the
I have
United
people
States.
to correct me before I go into some very public event and start going off on some weird, stupid accent that I have. It's no good.
Although somebody did compliment my accent. I had an
The
Irish
accent that you have.
An Irish person said, "I like your accent." I'm like, okay.
Are you from? Where are you from? Are you from here?
Midwest, Fort Wayne, born and raised.
Really? So I'm from northern Indiana. They would say I kind of have like a Chicago,
Oh,
but I don't know what that sounds like.
yeah.
I think it's just kind of a.
The Bears.
It's kind of like if you have this kind of. It's not going to be all a boot or anything like that. That's
No,
too
that
north.
Canadian.
It's
yeah.
not. Nobody wants that. The ice is blue. The pikes are running. How long you been in doing the whole criminal justice thing? You are. What's your position here? Let's do that.
I am the director of the Criminal Justice and Criminology program here at the university.
How long you been doing that?
I've been full-time going on 9 years. I started the program in 2015. Before that, I was an adjunct instructor, teaching all of the criminology courses for the sociology program. They had a concentration in criminology, so that's kind of where I got my start while I was a practitioner working in the criminal justice system in Allen County.
So 2015. What'd you do prior to that?
I got my career start in criminal justice at the prosecuting attorney's office. Allen County prosecutors have investigators, so I kind of started as an investigator, worked my way up to deputy chief investigator, and then ultimately chief investigator the last 8 years I was there. At that time, I started kind of teaching as an adjunct and decided that that might be a path that I wanted to pursue.
Yeah.
So after 18 years, I started teaching as a full-time criminal justice chair for a different college, but decided I wasn't quite done working in the system. I still had more to give and more to do. So I became a consultant for criminal division services for about a year, did a jail population study, did some research, and then that led to a field officer position for the Allen County Drug Court program.
Wow.
So while I was doing that, I started at St. Francis as an adjunct and teaching. So I was kind of doing both and the best of both worlds, working in the system, but also kind of teaching.
When you got your first kind of idea of, hey, I might go into criminal justice, so did you get pulled into court on some trumped up charge, whatever, multiple felony kind of mistaken identity kind of thing, and you thought this is terrible, and I'm going to make sure to put the whole system on trial kind of thing, and you went into criminal justice to right all the wrongs of society, or something else?
I think it goes back to Nancy Drew.
Is it really
and
Nancy
just
Drew?
But I think a natural curiosity. I was always that kid that I wanted to know why. And I wanted to kind of get to the root of what was going on. And I needed answers. So I was always questioning and always trying to find things out. I think that's what drew me to it. No pun on Nancy Drew. Yes. But I really enjoyed just the aspect of the criminal justice system and how it worked. Yes, there was injustice, but at that time I was kind of out of college and not really understanding that whole concept, other than I enjoyed working in the system. I enjoyed kind of seeing a case start at the beginning and end with either a conviction, which working in prosecution, that's kind of what the goal was. But I enjoyed the courtroom. I enjoyed everything about it.
Yeah.
Every day was different. Every day was, you learned something new. You kind of figured out how the case had to be prepared to even go to trial. There's a lot of background that goes into trial preparation.
You just don't go into it willy-nilly.
No, and on TV you see them in the courtroom. You don't see a lot of the background preparation. So I found that fascinating.
You got a thing against the Hardy Boys?
No, I was
Do
okay
you?
yes, because I kind of had a little crush.
On David Cassidy?
Sean Cassidy.
Sean Cassidy. I can never remember which one it was.
Yes, it was Sean. A little bit Sean.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of liked it when they worked together. There was some chemistry in the show that they had. But
That was a good show way back.
it was a good show.
They had books too, right?
It
It goes back to the early 1900s.
Yes.
I was a big fan of those too. We were talking about Encyclopedia Brown, and I was always fascinated by some aspect of that little book they wrote that you're like, oh, okay. And he knew something about, because he was real smarty pants. And then you're always hoping and waiting that somebody had a textbook stolen so you could intervene in the name of justice and be part of that whole process. What's your favorite crime procedural on TV right now? Even movie if you want to. I want that.
I kind of binged True Detective,
Which one?
all of them.
What's the best season so far? Be careful.
I think what drew me to it was the Jodie Foster.
I like that one too.
Because I really wasn't watching any of the others, and it's like, oh, I like her. Silence of the Lambs is probably one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
I have a lot of favorite movies, but so I thought, well, that would be interesting. I started watching the first season.
That's a great one.
Matthew McConaughey, not really a fan.
He's too handsome, right?
No.
That's what I get. That's the problem I have too, right, John?
that connection.
You didn't like that first season because of Matthew McConaughey?
The first episode of the first season.
When he's sitting in the, he's drinking all the beers in the interrogation room?
Yeah, it just he kind of got on my nerves. But then I really got into it. That's how I am with a lot of those.
That's got the most, my wife and I watched, I had heard about it, and I thought, oh, that's kind of like one of those terrible pulp rags magazines you see at truck stops. Not quite sure. Not that I was looking for stuff at truck stops by any means, but I was like, oh, it's True Detective would be kind of cool. There's a scene in there, and I think John and I think you and I talked about that. It's all like one take where he goes into the biker house, and he's trying to get the girl or something like that? I can't remember what the deal is, and it's all one shot, and it's so intense. And I think my wife and I were watching. I think we were like, you can finally take a breath. It was such an intense, and that weird mirror thing that he kept looking in that one little mirror with his one eye. The second one comes along, not so good. Third season's good, and this last one was, I think, was spectacular.
Yes.
I
really like
supernatural and wonderful, and I like Jodie Foster. And up to the very last 15 or 20 minutes, I was just, what is this?
Right.
What am I looking at?
Right.
I don't know what to do with that. Other than True Detective, anything else? You a big Law and Order fan? 48 Hours? What?
I like Dateline 2020, kind of the real, true crime, kind of delving into that, because I do like the visual of the clips, showing the interviews, and then you always try to guess. They aren't interviewing the suspect, so therefore they're either in prison or something.
Or they have a
happened to
strange
them.
outfit on. Like, that looks like prison garb to me. It's blue, and it's kind of this off pink fuchsia or whatever color, and they're always kind of, well, that's kind of like,
Right. It's a real sterile room, and there's usually a desk in between them.
Right.
You hear the jingle of handcuffs, and
you're knocking off your two.
So that's what I enjoy about those, is trying to figure out who did it.
Yeah, it's always that one. You're like, there was one on the other day where they had an odd murder, and they found a woman, unfortunately, and they found a couple of things. That there was tire tracks where one of the tires was mismatched, and there were also on a branch there was a color blue, like it had scraped a car. So they looked at all this woman's friends, and they found this one guy that had a blue truck, and it had a mismatched tire. And they go and they find blood in the wheel well and everything else. And of course, they get him in there, and they said,
I actually saw that episode.
Did you?
Yes.
I don't know,
it was
was
an
that?
animal that they hit.
It was a rabbit.
And
then
they
he went, put it
tested
out
the
of its
blood,
misery.
And it was some other guy who had a blue vehicle with mismatched tires. And
it ended up being a police officer, which was crazy. Which I'm like, if they didn't have the forensics they do, I mean, that's an easy one. If they didn't have a way to type blood or show that it was animal blood,
right,
you're dead in the water. If they didn't have the new improvements and advancements, you're going to jail. And for the whole time, it was a rabbit, for the love of God.
Right.
And then no one's going to believe that story.
No.
That's just crazy.
So technology has definitely had a huge impact on
Well, since you've been
criminal
involved in this,
justice.
technology's rapidly changed.
Oh, absolutely. DNA was just kind of starting to come around and be legitimate. People were very skeptical of what DNA was when it first started coming. The OJ case was pretty much the first time that was ever.
Was that used in there?
Yes.
I didn't know the DNA was used.
But the jury didn't really believe it. It was a really tough sell. Nowadays, if there's no DNA, I mean, the jury's like, where's the DNA?
Right.
How can there not be any DNA?
When was it? 1990?
For OJ?
Yeah. 91?
94?
Was it? Oh, that was later than that?
Yes.
Kind of all is a blur in my mind now.
Yes,
in
it
a lot
is
of
a
ways.
blur.
That's not too long ago,
No.
as far as technology is concerned. It's amazing we've come this far. And like you say, it's like, got any DNA here? Because this would be really easy, open and shut case. I got to be a foreman on a domestic violence thing a while back, and it was
Interesting.
a stand your ground situation. And between a fiance and fiance, is that right? Fiance and fiance issue, co-fiancés, whatever that is. And it was interesting because it really all came down to, did the person have the right to defend and whatever else? And he was acquitted.
Yeah.
It was an interesting case.
Interesting.
We got to sit on there. It was during COVID and everything else. And so kind of an odd bunch of things going on. A lot of times people, not me, Heather, will confess to crimes they did not commit. Why? That's a big one that comes up on these shows where someone says, oh, I did it. Even John Benet Ramsey some years ago had a guy come out of the middle of nowhere and confess to the whole thing and did it.
There were like 8 people who came out and confessed.
Is that right?
On John Benet
I just know this
Ramsey.
last one. I could see that's a whole different that's a whole different situation there. Why do people confess to something they didn't commit? Totally innocent. No reason for them to confess to this. Why do they do that?
You and I would sit here and think, how could somebody ever do that?
Yeah.
I could never do that. Why would somebody do that? There's actually quite a few reasons why somebody would. You look at a lot of those cases where individuals are confessing, and there's been a lot of research into this. A lot of psychologists have kind of delved into that. That's where forensic psychology comes from. It's the law, working with psychologists who are professionals that research why somebody could come up with this. A lot of it goes back to interrogation techniques. In the olden days, detectives really didn't have, it was kind of a free-for-all on how they would elicit a confession.
However to get it,
Absolutely, rubber hose and all of that. But things have changed a bit.
Well, the Central Park 5, that's
right.
one that you and I talked about.
Yes.
A very well-known one. What is that going to be, 20? 25?
It was 1989.
Was it?
is
So
when
that's-
that happened.
That's a lot longer than I thought. Central Park 5. What was the deal with that?
So when it came to that, they were very young. They were 14, 15, 16-year-old
They
kids.
were that young.
That were, and a lot of people know the stories. There's been a Netflix, there have been all kinds of movies done. Ken Burns did a whole documentary on it, including interviews with the 5. But they looked at that. That's kind of that test case of interrogation techniques, especially for juveniles. They were just kind of running wild, as they called it wilding, which nobody really knows where that term came from. In Central Park, they ended up trying to get several of these individuals they thought might be involved in the brutal attack of a jogger. And when it came down to it, these young men were held in interrogation for like 2 days. So they got them early in the morning, started interrogating them. Some of them had parents with them, some of them did not.
And that's against the law, correct?
Not necessarily. They have to make a concerted effort, a good effort to
really?
try to find parents.
But if they don't,
legal
they're on their
guardian.
own kind of thing?
They can refuse to answer any questions,
But if they don't know that,
oftentimes
right?
a 14, 15-year-old is not going to know that they, it's that authority figure that is kind of, they want to please them. They want to do as,
That's the whole Miranda rights type of situation.
Sure.
That
So
you
they're
don't
going to
have to.
they're going to
implicate
give
yourself.
them Miranda before
Okay.
they interview them. So juveniles do have the same rights as adults with that. But it just came down to the interrogators were saying, just tell us what we want to know and we'll let you go. And
It's an easy out. Why?
absolutely,
That's
it's an easy out.
scary
and it's like,
as-
fine, I will just tell you. And then they had all 5 of the young men kind of separated. They started getting little bits of information. They started telling them kind of what happened. And then the kids just started filling in the blanks and then trying to save their own skin by saying,
Was the other guys?
The other guys did it. I was kind of there, but I really, kind of negating what their involvement was and trying to save themselves.
That's
and
probably what I would have done too. Had somebody
diming out your buddy.
Right.
But a lot of them didn't really know each other before that came about.
They were just kind of hanging out that night.
Yeah, just kind of running through the Central Park, and it's kind of what they did.
Was the jogger, was she killed or was
No,
she just?
she was severely injured.
But she couldn't identify really
No,
anybody.
she had no memory of the time.
It's probably good.
Exactly.
Good and bad.
Multiple skull fractures and lost an eye and just, horrific injuries and sexually assaulted. So, but, going back to DNA, there was DNA at that time.
There was, but
the DNA actually excluded all 5 of those young men.
did they use DNA in the trial at all?
They
or-
brought it up, and for the fact that they weren't able to put, the DNA of those 5 young men on this young woman, the prosecution basically said, well, there was another person
that we don't
just
know
have
about
not
yet.
apprehended.
I gotcha.
And so, but when it came down to the confessions, even some of their parents that were in the interrogation room with them were saying, just tell them what they want to know. Let's just get out of here. Just tell
Really?
them. So that can go either way. Some parents can go in and say, don't say a word. We're going to get a lawyer.
Yeah.
And other parents are like, well, just tell them what they want to know. And you're a juvenile, this is minor. You didn't do this. So we'll just kind of wash it out later.
So most of these kids served quite lengthy prison
About
sentences.
7 years for most of them. The oldest, who was 16 at the time, served 13 years.
How did they end up getting back on the street, though? How did they prove their innocence after that?
The 4 did their time. Corey Wise, who was the oldest, he was still serving serious time. He actually ran into somebody in prison who admitted it was me.
Well, the guy admitted it to him.
Yes.
I didn't know that part.
Yes. So there was another serial rapist at the time. But, these rapes were occurring kind of in that same time frame. Mateus is the actual perpetrator's last name. But he, I think, felt bad. He had this conscious effort to basically say, these poor kids, it was me. I'm in here in prison on another rape they caught me for. But they had DNA that they could have connected from the jogger to these other serial rapists or rape victims that the investigation never did. They never analyzed that. And they could have had that perpetrator at that time.
Did they not have they have this huge database now? It's a national database.
Yes.
And that's kind of been growing. There's been pockets of it here and there in those 48 hours or Dateline shows you. They talk about the Forensic Files is a good show that I like because it shows you, and they always say that was the first time that fingerprint, which is kind of an interesting one because they're not really sure if anybody's matches or not. It's just that it's been that way and they've never found 2 matching other people's prints or something. I don't know. I don't do your job, Heather. I don't claim to. I'm always fascinated by those shows because they show you where these things started, however humbly. And then, like you were talking about before, that people will, I don't know if I believe that. This whole DNA, what is this? This sounds a little highfalutin, but nowadays it's got any DNA?
Right. Yeah.
Got any
It's that
gunshot
expectation.
residue?
And anybody who's convicted of a felony, they're going to do a swab.
Right.
So they're going to put that in the database.
It's not misdemeanor, it's felony, right?
Felony. Right. Right.
Why not misdemeanor? Why just get them in the database and be done?
It's just, it depends, I think, depends on the jurisdiction. It depends on state legislation, on you
Probably
know,
a crime, too?
because it's an invasion of your privacy,
Oh,
basically, to be able to do that. And when you're convicted of a felony, you kind of lose some of your rights to a point.
So what you're saying
could
is
lose your freedom.
don't get convicted of a felony.
Absolutely.
That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Loud and clear, Heather.
Don't confess.
Don't confess.
The future is what you make it, so make it matter.
At the University of St. Francis,
We'll help you build a purposeful life.
one based on your interest, goals, and desire to make the world a better place.
Learning is personal here.
You'll be known by name
supported by experts.
and connected to professional opportunities.
Our Catholic values will inspire you to use your education for the greater good.
By serving and leading others.
Build a life of meaning and purpose.
At the University of St. Francis,
You
You belong here.
I talked with one of the first podcasts John and I did was with Dr. Mario Baldassar. And very interesting one. I think he was messing with me at one time because he made me think something. He was like a weird Svengali magician, mind reader guy. I still kind of feeling a little off by that interview we did. But we talked about eyewitnesses and how hard that is. One of the things you talked about, you and I talked to the other day, was the Innocence Project, which I think is fascinating. We'll talk about that in a second. Why is it that identifying people is so difficult when if you and I said, I could say, this is Heather, I could see her, pack on some duress, pack on a stressful situation, noise, any kind of predestined ideas in my mind about people, different people, all kinds of different things. Why can't we get a good eyewitness?
A lot of it is just time, because usually when an incident occurs, it's very, very quick. So you know, like if there's a car crash, you know, everybody's at kind of a different angle perhaps, or a different situation, or they're in their car on their phone, or, you know, whatever is going on. It happens like that. And then it's almost like, did that really happen?
Yeah.
Did you know, it takes a minute for your brain to kind of like focus on what's going on. But like you said, there's distractions, there's trauma, there's duress, there's stress. And oftentimes it's very difficult for somebody to get a good view of that perpetrator. Like, you know, if you're committing that bank robbery that you want to do, for the fact that, you know, you can commit any crime that you want.
Right.
If I was in there and I was just kind of waiting in line and not paying attention, everybody's on their phone, so you're probably scrolling through Facebook and not really paying attention. You're not really focused on what's happening. And then I could see you go up and I'm thinking, okay, how much longer is this guy going to be? And then all of a sudden, you know, this happens and you take off. And I may not have even gotten a good look at you. I may have just gotten a glimpse. The same for everybody else in there, especially the tellers who, you know, might have a gun. If you, I don't know how you plan on doing your bank robbery, but if
I
it's,
can't tell you that,
with
Heather,
a weapon, or
it's giving away the farm.
You know, if you have
fool would I
have
be?
a mask,
I'm sure I'd have a mask
you know,
on.
That's one thing with going back to COVID. You know, everybody could
I'll use
have
a whole
robbed a bank.
mask,
you
like
know,
you know,
a
the
ski
Mike-
mask. Yeah.
I'm probably going to go the William Shatner, Mike Myers mask from Halloween. That was William
okay.
Shatner. Did you know that? Did you know that, folks?
I did not know that.
Mike Myers' mask, so help me God, in Halloween is William Shatner. I'm not joking. Yeah, they actually just cut the eyeballs out bigger to make it weirder. It's a William Shatner mask.
Interesting. But yeah,
I could use that.
you could.
But then again, I can't give away the farm. Heather. People watching. Not a lot of people. I don't think the police or the legal system watches many of these podcasts.
But when you think about juries, they love eyewitness ID. They have this.
They eat it up.
Oh, they do. It's like, oh, well, if you saw that person do it, then obviously you did it. And that's what a lot of the individuals who are falsely convicted, it's because of false identification, false eyewitness identification, as well as going back to the false confessions, because jurors think, well, they confessed.
Why would you?
So obviously they did it. Why would anybody just make that up?
Yeah.
But when it comes to eyewitness identification, same thing.
That's
well,
gold.
if you were there, you obviously saw that person.
Number one, I'm not on social media, so I'm a great witness.
You're paying attention, you're focused.
All the time.
Taking notes.
Just
in
laser
case.
focus. I look everybody in the eyes, and
Yeah.
I'm constantly,
Yeah.
I'm doing an ocular pat down. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. They talk about doing an ocular pat down. You and I talked about a guy named Ronald Cotton
Yes, Ronald.
as kind of an interesting about eyewitness testimony. We're going to put a picture up here for you as a comparison between the two individuals. What was the deal with that case?
It was Jennifer Thompson was a college student that was sleeping, and someone broke into her home, sexually assaulted her. When this was going on, in her mind, she's thinking, I just want to survive. And if I do survive, I want to make sure that I have a really good visual picture of my perpetrator, so they can be apprehended and charged with this crime. And so she said that she studied the face and the hair and the clothing and everything about this person, and she was able to get away. She gave a composite to the police as far as what she visualized this person to be, thought it was a pretty good composite. They kind of sent it out into the community, and some people were saying, I know who this guy is. This is, Ronald Cotton. He came in for an interview and basically never left prison. He was convicted. But before that, she went to the police department. They did a photo array, which is pictures of mugshots of
So you get a photo
individuals.
of Ronald,
She had in this
and you get
photo
a photo
array.
of another guy side by side, and you can see both those in the comparison, right?
They gave her a photo array of like 8,
Yeah.
6 or 8 individuals, and she said that she studied that very well. She, really took her time, methodically went through each person and selected this photo of Ronald Cotton. Then they brought in a lineup. So they brought in individuals somewhat similar looking, not really, really good. But she also picked out Ronald Cotton. The detective at that time is like, oh, good job. That's the same person that you picked out in the photo array. So she's feeling pretty confident. And it went to trial. She identified him in the courtroom. He was convicted, went to prison. He adamantly denied, said, it wasn't me. I've been wrongly convicted. And several years go by, and there's another individual, Bobby Poole, who shows up at the same prison. They're working in the laundry together, and everybody started calling Ronald Cotton Bobby Poole.
Because they were that similar?
Looked very, very similar.
Really?
And Bobby Poole was in on a rape charge. So when it came down to Ronald Cotton saying, I think somebody needs to take a look at this.
Right.
It might be him. And he was able to get an appeal. He got a new trial. Jennifer Thompson was in the courtroom again, and Bobby Poole was in the courtroom, and she had no recollection of Bobby Poole. It was focused on Ronald Cotton, who she had memorized the face.
That's what she had.
So
All of
she
her
thought-
ideas, everything was hinged upon that.
Absolutely. But this confirmation bias of, well, it's got to be, you picked him out of the lineup. You picked him out of, the photo array.
Yeah.
So it's got to be him. And he ended up, again, being reconvicted with a longer sentence for the second time.
There's no DNA on this one? Or is this
This was a little
go back a ways,
a
like
little
79, 82?
It was in the
something like that?
80s.
Was it really?
It was in the 80s, but they ended up finding out that it was Bobby Poole, and he was exonerated. Ronald Cotton was exonerated. They believe there was some evidence, there was some DNA that they were able to get from another rape that they had.
Okay.
And so he ultimately, Bobby Poole was convicted of Jennifer's rape, and Ronald was released.
I suppose there's probably a couple of books written by this.
There have,
About this.
and the thing about this is that once he was exonerated, Jennifer reached out to him and wanted to meet him, and he said, "Sure, I'll meet." They met at a church, and
But we're going to need to have 20 or 30 people around just in case there's a
And
misunderstanding.
he forgave her. He walked up to her, grabbed her hands, and said, "I forgive you."
That's so tough.
And she said that it was an unbelievable, experience. And they became friends.
Wow.
And they co-wrote a book called Picking Cotton because she picked him out of that lineup.
Oh, that's just waiting to happen for a title.
And then there have been, other documentaries based on their true story. It's interesting, during one of their interviews, they're asked, "So when you guys are traveling together and people ask, how did you meet?" So that's then the story that they go with.
Yoga class? What's confirmation bias? I've heard this a couple of times. It's come out in the news in the last year. I've heard this a couple different times. What is that?
Basically, when you are assured that you believe that you're right, or you have enough circumstantial evidence to believe that this is the correct assumption, then there can be other evidence that comes in after the fact that you disregard. And it's like, well, that has no relevance because I'm already reassured
Right.
because of all the information that I have been provided initially. So you're so biased to your previous, I guess, confirmation that that's what it is, that you kind of discount.
You can't be swayed? Is it hard to get you out of that?
Some people can, but it can be very difficult because I don't know. I have a little stubborn tendency.
No.
So once I am set in my ways, it does take a little bit for me to kind of get out of that. But I'm certainly open, where some people it's like tunnel vision.
Really?
They're focused, and nothing that you tell me is going to change my mind.
And a lot of things could probably go into justifying your answers as well. I'm certain, your
Sure.
age and gender, ethnicity, anything would probably go into your confirmation bias, I would assume.
Sure. When it comes down to, what you know and what your experiences are.
Yeah.
And you feel like you know yourself, or you have that pride. And it's like, well, I can't
Right.
this is what I've been saying all along. I can't really back
Can't
away
back
now.
away from it now. You're all in.
Right.
Knowing your experience, you've got a year and a half in criminal justice and 6 months in working in the penal system, or whatever you were talking about earlier. I had a terrible memory.
A year and a half.
Year and a half, 6 months, and some other thing. What do
30 years.
You go into class. You're going to walk into class late August or whatever we can start. I never remember when we
August
started.
26th.
That's right.
I just know it's.
That's right.
Folks,
The minute you said it,
no,
like, yeah,
it's
okay,
gonna be
that's
here
right.
too soon.
August 26th, you're going to walk into a class. What do you teach? What do you do? What do you do in a criminal justice class?
It depends on the class. The program is pretty diverse because we talk about victimology. We talk about the criminal justice system, which is law enforcement, court system, and corrections. We talk about drugs in society and the impact that they have. Talk about criminal law, causes of crime. So there are so many different courses that really give students a thorough understanding of different career options, they all watch. Students come in and they have all watched the podcast or listened to the podcast. They've watched, all of these Netflix and all of these shows, and they have an idea of what the criminal justice system is really like. So I like to kind of let them know, yes, that is part of it. but this is how things actually occur.
Yeah.
I've had the pleasure of working with so many different law enforcement agencies and criminal justice agencies over my career that I have a better understanding of what those real life jobs are, and so I like to explain to them, this is to be a crime scene tech, because everybody wants to be CSI when they come in. It's like, well, more than likely you're going to have to be a police officer first and then work your way up to crime scene.
Is that the way that works? Mm-hmm. Why is that? Just so you're familiar with procedures and stuff?
Absolutely.
Okay.
To understand
I
continuity.
thought you just would have went in as a tech and been done.
Not necessarily. They are kind of going to that trend because of the technology that is so involved with evidence and evidence collection and analyzing the evidence and DNA. Again, everything kind of hinges on DNA. If you want to do that, if you want to work in a lab, then you get a biology degree, you get a chemistry degree, and you work in a lab to analyze. It's not like, CSI, where the same person goes out, secures the crime scene, gathers the evidence, and then takes it back to the lab and analyzes it in 15 minutes, and you've got your results right then. It doesn't work
that quickly.
That. And that's what
Takes a little longer, does it?
Absolutely. So typically, it's always been designed that you're a law enforcement officer, you understand the scene, you understand what to gather, what would be evidence, how to put it into continuity, and then they send it off to the lab where the lab analysts are doing their job and getting the results. But that could be a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months.
I've heard something recently about that there was all these cases that were kind of in flux because they just don't have the manpower to sit there and do the kind of stuff that you're talking about, whatever that is.
Right.
Analysis, DNA, whatever the thing is, to take all these pieces of information, evidence, if you will, to the layperson, and have all this information and say, yeah, we just don't have, there's 3 people here, we need 20 working in here, and so it's going to be a long time, maybe if ever we get to it. And how stuff gets lost or taken away. I mean, that's a terrible. What's, how many classes are there? You said that you take classes here. How many?
Sure.
How many are in the criminal justice?
There's about
major?
35 credit hours. So 30.
10, 11?
About 12.
12?
So maybe
Whatever.
my math is off. I'm a social science major,
Well, you're
not
not a
a mathematician.
right.
I have a calculator. But when it comes to, like I said, you've got your basic, this is the criminal justice system. These are jobs that you could obtain if you want. So that's like an introductory course. Then, like I said, we start getting into more specifics. So there's a course dedicated just to intro to law enforcement. So we talk about the different levels of law enforcement. So you've got your local, you've got your campus police, you've got your city, your county, your state level, and then you go up to the federal level. So that's the alphabet soup: FBI, DEA, CIA. And a lot of students do want to come in and immediately get a degree in criminal justice and work for the FBI. It's not that easy. A lot of times they're looking for folks that are prior military, prior law enforcement experience. They love lawyers. They love computer techs. So having because so many crimes that are committed are, that technology type or
even cybercrime now.
Sure,
I
absolutely,
mean, that's a big thing.
Absolutely. So they're looking for individuals with that kind of background.
Right.
So that sometimes opens the eyes of the students. It's like, maybe that's not what I wanted. One of the big trends that I'm seeing now, and I think and I want to take some credit that I'm providing a violence and victimology course.
Okay.
So
what is that?
With that, we're focusing on the victims and not necessarily the perpetrator. The system always, the criminal justice system particularly, they want to get the perpetrator, of course they want justice for the victims, but they focus on getting somebody arrested, getting somebody, into court and convicted and sentenced. But the victim through the years has kind of just been a secondary. And so there's been only since the mid 80s, victim rights, where victims have the right to know when somebody has been apprehended,
Released
when they've
also.
been, absolutely,
Yeah.
when their hearings are, when the trial is, and then when they're being released from prison or jail. And up until that point, they never really had the ability to
didn't
know
know.
what was going on, because most people, they don't know the criminal justice system unless they've
don't.
been in it.
I have no idea.
You know, they know what they've seen on TV.
It
And
has to be true.
and so Law and Order SVU
Yeah.
has really opened the eyes of society, I think.
Is that a
on-
fairly accurate show for a lot of
I
things?
think so.
Or at
I
least
think-
an introduction of it?
Sure, it's very brief and condensed, like all of the shows, but they really give a view of how victims sometimes are treated
Yeah.
in the system. And up until the 80s, it wasn't very good. It was more family justice, vigilante justice. But now there really is a focus of professionals who want to ensure that victims get justice for
Well, they're
their
not
crimes.
re-victimized or continually victimized.
And yes,
That's not just, you're not just a resource for the case. You are.
right.
You're not evidence. Well, you are, but
Mm-hmm.
you can't be a person who just constantly lives in this this realm of doubt and so forth. Recently, the Supreme Court, this last, I think, week or two, ruled on a case. I can't remember the case now. And it was about domestic violence abusers and committing felonies and receiving their guns back. And they actually 8-1.
Yep.
Clarence Thomas is the only one dissented.
Yes.
That they said, no, we're going to go ahead and have that law stand, which is a very interesting approach. You're saying, listen, if you're likely to commit these kind of domestic violences, you're very likely to continue this, perpetuate this, and push this even forward further.
Yes.
What do you think about that? Is that a slippery slope, or is that a good thing?
I was very in tune with what was going on with the
You were
Supreme
watching that
Court.
one?
I was watching it because we have had that law in Indiana for quite some time that if you are convicted of domestic battery, you cannot possess a firearm, a handgun.
I didn't know that was
primarily.
actually a law.
It is, and if in fact you are convicted of domestic battery, you are found with a handgun. That's another charge, and so when you look at domestic violence, it is. I could do a whole show on domestic violence, but it was, it starts off as, could be psychological, it could be, it's just very controlling, and it continues on this progression usually to physical violence, and ultimately it can end in death.
Right. Well, they
and-
test the waters the whole time to see
Sure.
what they can get away with.
Sure, absolutely.
Maybe even normalize it for a long time.
And oftentimes, what I talk about a lot in my violence and victimology class is that people say, well, why doesn't she just leave?
Right.
Why doesn't she just
That
leave?
always comes up, but there's so many things
And there
with
are
that.
so many factors that are involved in that, and it's just not that easy. And
you're right.
so, again, that could be a whole other show. But when it comes to having a firearm accessible, unfortunately, there are a lot of domestic deaths
Yeah.
because of that. And so the law institutes that anybody who's been convicted of a domestic battery cannot possess a handgun. That is true for law enforcement. There have been law enforcement officers who have been convicted and charged with domestic battery
And they
who
can
would
no lo-
lose their jobs because their job requires them to carry a firearm. And
Did Andy Griffith carry a firearm?
he did.
Did he?
Yeah, there was one Bullet Barney,
Was there-
his sidekick,
Yeah, but he had it around his.
and
Here, I'll give you. Let me give you my.
but I believe I recall him actually carrying a firearm. But he
I don't
wasn't
remember
involved
if
in
he
any
did or not.
domestics. Andy was too nice.
That's what he always solved
He
it
was
with
just a
his
nice
mind.
guy.
Was I don't know if Columbo carried a firearm.
No, he was not law enforcement. He was
He was
just a
detec-
private detective.
Was he a private detective?
Yes.
I always wondered that.
Yes.
I love that show.
I did too. In his trench coat, and then he always came back. One more thing.
Go on. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, he did one more thing. He'd come back with that cross eye. Let me ask you something. I got a question for you, sir. On a shadow they saw. I always liked the Barney Fife. When I was growing up, for some reason that show was on all the time. being that Andy Griffith, the name of the theme song is called The Fishing Hole. And it was Andy Griffith. It was one of his songs.
Okay.
That was one thing I know. And my brother and I, he could do Floyd the Barber. Oh, yeah, Andy. Oh, and he would do that weird imitation. It was really great. And I could always do Barney. Well, Ange had to pull out the bullet and karate chop him. And when you said bullet, I was like, that's exactly the line I've used. Pulling out the bullet today, Thelma Lou. And I thought, you're right. He had a bullet in his pocket. That's where he would pull it out, and he would show people once in a while. That's how apparently Mayberry was not the hub of crime, criminal activity. How do you, when you're looking at students that are coming to classes, they're coming in kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, do they get discouraged with what this is, or are they more empowered over time?
More empowered over time.
Are they really?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, the more that they know, the more involved they get, the more options they feel for potential careers. But I have students that come in wanting to do one thing. They can change their mind 4 or 5 different times from the time they're a freshman to the time they're a senior, even when they do a practicum or I have them do a field experience in the program. There used to be an required internship, but a lot of law enforcement agencies unfortunately don't have the ability to host a lot of interns.
Is that just a resource thing? Or
A
is it...
resource thing, confidentiality thing.
Yeah, okay. I could see some of that.
So with that, there is a trend because unfortunately there are a lot of law enforcement agencies that really need candidates, recruits to come. The numbers are down for folks that want to be law enforcement. I think that there's a big push for recruitment. I know there's a big push for recruitment right now, trying to get folks in there. So Fort Wayne Police Department is just starting back up an internship program. So with the programs that are offered in the community, students are getting an idea of what that might entail. So I really like to get students working or doing ride-alongs if they want to go into law enforcement with those officers. I have a lot of students that decide they want to go into probation. I have a lot of students that think, well, you know what, I want to be a victim advocate. And that's kind of the trend right now is victim advocacy. I have a lot of graduates who have done their field experience with the prosecuting attorney's office. I have 2 former graduates that are now, they interned with the domestic violence coordinator that are now working in the prosecuting attorney's office. I have another student just graduated this year. She did an internship and a field experience with the prosecutor's office here. She is now the domestic violence coordinator down in Johnson County, her home county. So there is that trend for that. I have students that want to go to law school. So
there needs to be people that can do that.
Absolutely.
To help in that fashion.
And that's what I find with a lot of my students, because first day of class, they call it syllabus day. You go over the syllabus, but I want to learn, about my students and what their interests are. So we go around and I have them kind of talk about what careers, what shows they like to watch that have inspired them to take this degree. And a lot of them will say, well, I just want to help people.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what I want to do, but I think that this is a field that I could make an impact with and I can help people. And I encourage that. Anybody who works in the system, you're not doing it for the money.
Yeah.
You're not doing it for the glory. You're doing it because you really care and you want to help people.
That's great.
Yeah.
I got one last question for you.
Yes.
The best movie depiction of crime. I'm going to give you either or, okay?
Okay.
Batman or the movie Seven with Brad Pitt. We're going to go back to Brad Pitt.
Start with Brad, end with Brad.
Apparently, that's how we do this podcast.
What's in the box?
What's in the box?
What's in the box?
Her head wasn't in. Her head was never shown, but there was a superimposed image. People think that's a Mandela effect. They say.
Yeah.
So Batman, is that a pretty good? Because he's a detective.
He's a crime fighter.
But
he's a rich kid that's got fancy toys. Yeah, not a fan.
What,
So
7?
let's go right to 7.
7's a better
Yes.
articulate version of
Yes,
that.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a great, terrible, horrible,
It
creepy,
is,
scary movie.
and I show it in my class.
That's a great
I mean, it's the 7 deadly sins.
It
You
is.
know, and
It's such a good movie.
Just the way that it's kind of a dark. You know,
I love
there's a lot of rain and. You know, it's got the love story that ends in
got a little bit of everything.
tragedy, you know.
Morgan
Spoiler alert.
Freeman throws knives.
Morgan Freeman is just classic in
comes in
this.
with
He
that
just wants to
voice.
retire. And this case is
Right.
driving him
I
crazy.
just don't want to go.
Yeah.
Hey, John, who directed 7? See, John's not here. That's the joke. He had to leave early today.
But-
David Fincher is
Okay.
guy who directed that.
Yeah. Classic.
It's a great movie.
Yes.
It's terrible. If you want to watch a great movie that's going to stick with you for the remainder of your existence, watch the movie 7. There actually is, I think, a sequel I've heard.
Really?
That a quasi sequel that happened after that. I don't remember
Is
what
it
it is
8?
now. Boy, it'd be terrible if it were. Hey, folks, I'm glad you got a chance to watch the show today with Heather Jeffries, the Criminal Justice Department here at the University of St. Francis. We're going to put her email down here at the bottom right in front of her face. Ba-da-bang. If you got any questions or you'd like to know more about the program, she'd love to answer the kind of questions you have, unless it's how to get away with bank robbery. That's going to be our off-camera conversation. Hope you enjoyed the show today. We'll see you next time.